My name is Eliza Katon, and for most of my life I carried the weight of a last name that was more of a uniform than an identity. My father was General Marcus Thorne, a man so revered in military circles that his word was treated like law, even when that law destroyed me. The day he stood in front of a war room full of officers and engineers and called me a failure to my face was the day something inside me shattered and something else began to rise. You see, he thought he could erase me with silence, with shame, with power. But what he didn't know was that silence can also be a blueprint for retribution. This isn't a story about screaming back. It's a story about outlasting the storm, about building truth in the shadows and letting it speak louder than betrayal ever could. Before we begin, I want to ask, where are you watching from and how old are you? And if this kind of quiet justice speaks to you, hit subscribe to Subtle Revenge Stories so you don't miss what's coming next. He didn't just humiliate me, he tried to erase me. My father, General Marcus Thorne, stood tall in the middle of the Strategic Operations Center at White Sands, flanked by blinking holoscreens and rows of high-ranking officers. His voice didn't waver, not for a second. "Who allowed this failure in here?" he said, and his finger was aimed directly at my chest like a firing squad had just been assembled. He didn't call me Eliza. He didn't say Major. He said failure like it was a name, a final rank, a life sentence. That one word rang through the room louder than any gunshot I'd ever heard. The 50 pairs of eyes around me didn't blink. Not one person stepped forward. The air turned colder, not from the AC vents humming above, but from the silence that dropped like a coffin lid. I stood at attention, every muscle in my body burning from the weight of their stares, their whispers slithering through the sterile air like poison gas. That's her, Thorne's daughter, the one who blew up the Chimera prototype. Every step I took toward the center felt like walking on glass. My boots clicked 1-2 each sound, sharp, echoing judgmental. I kept my spine straight, my chin up. But I wasn't saluting. I was surviving. I saw him then, my father. He stood at the head of the room, tall and stiff, his uniform crisp, his metals perfectly aligned like the bars of a cage. He didn't look at me at first. He let me stew, watched me drown in silence as if that was part of the protocol. Then he turned slowly, theatrically, and locked eyes with me. Eyes just like mine. Cold, exact, dissecting. The kind of look a man gives to a broken piece of gear before throwing it away. And then he laughed. It wasn't a laugh meant for humor. It was a weapon sharp, cruel, engineered to detonate in the heart of the room and leave nothing standing. When the laughter stopped, the silence that followed was worse. He spoke again, every syllable like a hammer. Who? Allowed. This. Failure. In. Here I didn't flinch, not outwardly. But inside I was crumbling. My throat clenched. My knees screamed. I was drowning in humiliation, and he was the one holding me under. Beside him stood Julian Caldwell, his pet prodigy, the man who'd taken my seat at every table since the explosion. He smiled smug and hollow like he'd already won something he hadn't even earned. I stared back at both of them, my posture unbroken, but the war had already begun, and it wasn't one of missiles or guns. It was one of truth. And I had more of it than they ever expected. So, let me ask you something. Have you ever stood in a room where someone who was supposed to protect you turned the whole world against you instead? Tell me in the comments. Because I stood in that room, and I remember every single second. That wasn't the first time he took something from me. It happened long before Chimera, long before war rooms, and rank and ruined reputations. I was 17. The spotlight at West Point burned hot on my skin as I stood on a polished wood stage holding a gold-plated trophy, still dazed from the sound of my name being called. I had just won first place in the National Science and Engineering Fair for military dependents, a mouthful of a title for a project that consumed my entire year. My design, a miniaturized inertial guidance system I'd built from scratch in the garage. I'd soldered wires until my fingers blistered, calculated dozens of equations on sleepless nights. I earned every piece of that win. And then they invited my father on stage. At the time, I thought it was a gesture of pride. He looked immaculate in his dress blues polished shoes clicking against the floor as he approached the podium. His voice, trained to command battalions, boomed through the microphone with ease. He spoke about values, teamwork, leadership, broad, noble words that had nothing to do with what I'd built with my bare hands. And then came the lie. He gestured to my younger brother Leo, sitting lazily in the third row with his usual half-interested smirk. Eliza's success today, my father announced, is a testament to the leadership and teamwork of my son Leo, who brought the team together and ensured the project stayed on schedule. I couldn't breathe. My brother, who'd spent 15 lazy minutes helping me glue my charts to a poster board, was now being hailed as the reason I stood on that stage. The applause was thunderous. For Leo, not for the girl who had spent months building something no one thought possible. No, they clapped for the golden boy, my father's chosen son. I stood frozen, clutching the heavy trophy, my name engraved into the metal, but my identity stripped in front of hundreds of strangers. My mouth smiled. My eyes didn't. After the ceremony, Leo came up to me beaming. "We did it," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Great job, sis." That one word sank into my chest like a stone. He didn't even know what he'd taken. He had grown so used to standing in the light cast by my work that he thought it belonged to him. And why wouldn't he? Our father taught him that. My father hadn't just stolen credit that day, he rewrote my story in real time. And I let him. I didn't fight back. I was too stunned, too young, too desperate for his approval to risk losing what little I thought I had. But I remembered. Oh, I remembered. Because standing in that war room years later as he did it again, publicly, violently, I realized something had changed. I wasn't 17 anymore. I wasn't holding a trophy. I was holding my silence. And that silence had turned to steel. Have you ever had someone smile while erasing you as if it were nothing at all? Tell me. Because I lived it, and I want to know if you did too. He never raised his voice. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even say much. But my uncle, my mother's older brother, was the first and maybe the only man in my life who ever looked at my work and saw me. That night after the award ceremony turned into a farce of false glory and claps for Leo. I sat alone in a bare guest room at the academy barracks. My trophy was on the desk, but it looked like fool's gold under the flickering yellow light. The walls felt too quiet, too hollow, and the silence pressed down on my chest like a weight. I was staring at the hand-drawn schematics I'd used for my prototype pages, covered in graphite calculations, smudges, and margin notes, when the knock came. It wasn't my father. It wasn't Leo. It was Uncle David. He smelled faintly of motor oil and cold air. He'd driven 6 hours from Maryland just to be there for my presentation, and he had missed the speech entirely. I expected him to offer some awkward apology, or maybe try to cheer me up. But he didn't do any of that. Instead, he walked quietly to the desk, his footsteps soft, deliberate. He didn't say a word. He just looked down at my sketches, placed one of his large, calloused hands over the papers, and closed his eyes. The gesture was so small, so still, but it hit me harder than any standing ovation could have. It was reverence. It was real. "They can applaud the story," he said. After a moment, his voice a deep rumble like distant thunder. "But this machine, it only obeys the truth. And you are the one who created that truth." I looked up at him, my throat, tight eyes burning. He leaned in, just slightly lowered his voice like he was letting me in on a secret only the machines would understand. "You're an engine whisperer, Eliza. You hear things other people can't." He left shortly after, no long speech, no grand advice. Just a look that said he saw me. That moment didn't fix the pain, but it did something better. It built a quiet shelter inside me, a place I would return to again and again over the years. In the long nights to come, whether in silence or in sabotage, in grief or in grease-stained hope, I'd hold on to that single truth that what I built worked, and that someone who mattered knew it. Sometimes you don't need a crowd. You just need one person who sees the truth in you and doesn't look away. So let me ask you, has there ever been one quiet voice in your life that mattered more than 1,000 loud ones? I'd love to hear about them. Because sometimes it's the quiet ones who save us. I didn't leave the military with a bang. I slipped out quietly like a ghost. No ceremony, no folded flag, no final salute. Just a silent exit and a sealed record of disgrace. I took every dollar I had left saving severance, even the loose change in my kitchen drawer, and poured it into a rusted corrugated metal building on the outskirts of Las Cruces, New Mexico. Garage 17. That's what the faded numbers above the door said. It was nothing, just dust grit and walls that rattled when the wind got mean. But it was mine. The place was hell in the summer, like working inside an oven, and colder than regret in winter. There was no front desk, no receptionist, no whiteboards. Just me, a set of battered craftsman tools, a dented hot plate, and a radio that only picked up static-laced old country songs. The air smelled like old coffee and burnt oil. Some days I loved it. Some days it felt like punishment. Either way, I showed up. At first, the customers came slow. Mostly ranchers with sun-scorched necks and old diesel trucks that coughed black smoke. They took one look at me, small-frame blonde hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and I could see it in their eyes. Doubt, contempt. The look that says, "You sure you know what you're doing?" Sweetheart, I didn't argue. I didn't sell myself. I just got to work. I remember one of the first jobs clearly. A rancher tossed a ring of keys onto my workbench like he was throwing down a gauntlet. "You break it any worse than it already is." He grunted, and I'm not paying a dime. I didn't flinch. I spent 12 straight hours under his truck fingers, bloodied from a slipped wrench face smeared with grease until I barely recognized myself in the mirror. When I finally turned the key, that old diesel engine didn't just start, it sang. A deep, clean, balanced hum. The rancher stood silent. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. He paid in cash and walked out different than he came in. I didn't need medals. I didn't need approval. I needed motion. Machines don't care about gossip or rank or legacy. They care about torque and timing, pressure and flow. And I understood them. I listened. And they listened back. That garage didn't heal me overnight, but it gave me a place to bleed where no one was watching. It gave me control over something, anything in a world that had taken everything else away. I found peace not in revenge, but in repair. Let me ask you, have you ever found peace in something broken? Not because someone fixed it for you, but because you fixed it yourself. I want to know, because sometimes healing doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from turning a wrench. It started like any other day. I was elbow deep in the engine block of a beat-up tractor that had been left out in the desert so long it practically fused with the sand. My hands were raw. My shoulders ached. I had just wiped the sweat from my eyes when my phone buzzed. At first I thought it was spam. The sender's address was a scrambled string of letters and numbers, military-style encryption. No greeting, no signature. Just one sentence. "We have a technical problem. We require your consultation. Discretion is absolute. A car will collect you tomorrow at 0800. I stared at the screen, a wrench still in my other hand. There was no name, no company. Just silence wrapped in authority. The kind of silence you don't ignore if you've ever worn a uniform. My gut screamed classified. My logic told me walk away. But the part of me that used to design systems that could kill or save lives, that part leaned forward. I typed one word, confirmed. The next morning, right on time, an unmarked black SUV with tinted windows rolled into the dirt lot in front of Garage 17. The engine barely made a sound. The man behind the wheel didn't speak. He didn't need to. The message had already been sent. I got in. We drove for hours into the heart of the Chihuahuan desert, past fences, past warnings, into a facility disguised as a derelict cattle ranch, but wired with surveillance so tight even the birds kept their distance. She was waiting for me. Salt and pepper hair in a severe bun dark pantsuit crisped despite the dust. Her name was Helena. Her handshake was firm, her words few. She led me through the facade into a lab that looked like it had been plucked straight from the Pentagon's classified depths. And there it was, the engine, mounted like an artifact. I recognized it instantly. An evolved version of something I once sketched in a hotel notebook years ago. "Everyone says it's dead," she said calmly. "They've tried everything." "What do you think?" I didn't answer right away. I just stepped forward and placed my palm on the cold metal casing. And for the first time in years, I felt something shift, something stir. This machine wasn't dead. It was waiting, and it was speaking, not in words, but in a rhythm, a hum, a discord. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't just about a broken machine. This was a summons, a reckoning. And whether I was ready or not, the ghosts of Chimera were calling me back. Let me ask you, if someone handed you the key to a locked chapter of your past, would you turn it, or would you walk away and leave the door closed forever? Because me, I turned it. And nothing was ever the same again. They didn't expect me to walk back through those doors. Not really. Not after what they'd done. The base hadn't changed much, same beige hallways, same recycled air that smelled like metal and silence, but I had. I wasn't there as a soldier. Not anymore. I was there as a civilian consultant under direct Pentagon authority. But from the moment I stepped into the engineering bay, I knew the war wasn't over. It had just changed shape. The briefing room was already full. Engineers tapping on tablets, murmuring about test results, avoiding my eyes like I was a ghost they didn't want to acknowledge. And at the head of the table, standing tall in that polished arrogance only nepotism could polish that clean, was Julian Caldwell, my father's prized successor. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It never had. I had barely started my presentation outlining the anomalies I'd identified in the fuel cycle rhythm when Caldwell raised a hand, stopping me mid-sentence. "With all due respect, Miss Katon," he said, dragging out the miss like it was acid on his tongue. A deliberate stripping of my former title. Major no more. Just a woman in grease-stained boots. He smirked and turned to the others, playing to his captive audience. "Your intuitive methods might work on farm equipment out in Las Cruces, but here we rely on data, established protocols, facts, not feelings." The room fell silent. Engineers looked down at their notes, pretending they hadn't heard the insult echo through every inch of the room. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a public challenge. He wanted me to react, to stumble, to confirm the narrative he and my father had built 3 years ago, that I was unstable, impulsive, unfit. But I didn't give him that. I looked him in the eye, didn't blink, and said, "The data isn't lying, Caldwell. You're just not asking it the right questions." My voice didn't crack. My hands didn't shake. "You're looking for a broken part. I'm listening for a discordant note. That's the difference between fixing something and understanding it." He shifted just slightly, enough for me to see the flicker of unease behind the smirk. That's when I knew I had struck something. I left that room without another word. Not because I was defeated, but because I knew the real proof wasn't in arguments or egos. It was in the machine. And I'd let it speak for me just like always. Have you ever been in a room where someone tried to rewrite your value in front of others? Tried to belittle your experience with a smile and a jab? If so, what did you do? Did you speak up? Or did you let your work do the talking? My phone rang that evening just as I was closing the door to my temporary quarters. Blocked number. But I knew who it was. Only one man in the world had the audacity to hide behind silence and still expect obedience. My father. I let it ring twice before answering. "Eliza," he said, calm, measured, like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't tried to annihilate me in front of 50 witnesses just days ago. His voice was smooth, the kind of practiced authority that wrapped itself in concern, but squeezed tight like a vice. "I hear you're causing some friction with Caldwell's team." I said nothing. Just let the silence answer for me. He didn't pause. He just kept going as if he were reading from a script. "You're digging up things that were settled 3 years ago. It's counterproductive. You need to remember your place. You're just a consultant here. An outside voice. Let the team do their work." There it was. Your place. Not your purpose. Not your truth. Just the box he wanted to shove me into. A small, convenient box labeled "Stay Quiet." I breathed in slowly, my voice even cold. "My place," I said, "is as the person who designed this system from the ground up. And I know it was altered." There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long, tight silence. The kind that only happens when someone realizes their script isn't working anymore. When he spoke again, the silk had vanished. In its place was steel. "I refined it," he said. "Your original design was too ambitious, too risky. I made it safer. I made it more practical. Don't make this situation worse for everyone with your professional arrogance." Professional arrogance. He said it like a diagnosis, like I was a patient getting in the way of my own treatment. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't manipulation. Not in his version. In his version, he was the hero cleaning up my mess, protecting the world from my recklessness. I stood in the middle of the room, the phone still pressed to my ear, and felt a quiet fury rise like steam from deep water. Not the explosive kind. The slow, steady kind that doesn't need shouting. Just certainty. I ended the call without saying another word, because there was nothing left to say. But that moment, that soft-spoken gaslit conversation did something important. It confirmed what I already knew deep down. This wasn't just a technical error. This was personal. This was betrayal disguised as fatherly concern. This was legacy being protected with lies. And I wasn't going to let that legacy bury me again. So tell me, have you ever had someone rewrite the story of your life so smoothly, so confidently that you started to question your own version? How did you fight to hold on to the truth? The second call came less than 5 minutes later. This time it wasn't a blocked number. It was my mother. I hesitated before answering. With her, the wounds were different. Not blunt force like my father's, but the kind that fester quietly over time. She didn't even wait for a hello. Her voice hit me like a wave of carefully engineered panic. "Eliza, what are you doing?" she cried, the sob in her throat rehearsed to perfection. "Your father is under so much pressure. His whole career, our family's name, everything is on the line. And now you're threatening to destroy it over what your pride." I stood there, jaw tight, one hand gripping the edge of the desk to keep from shaking. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't ask if I needed anything. She just launched into the role she'd been playing my entire life, the quiet guardian of appearances, the keeper of decorum, the one who fluffed the pillows while the house burned. "You have to stop this," she pleaded. "Think about Leo. Think about his future. He's worked so hard to build his career, and now your vendetta is going to ruin it. Please, Eliza, just take a step back." There it is, I thought. Not "we love you," not "we believe you." Just guilt wrapped in tears. She wasn't begging for truth. She was begging for silence. Her words landed like darts, each one aimed at the softest parts of me. But something inside me had shifted since that first courtroom humiliation. I wasn't that broken girl on stage at West Point anymore. I wasn't the silent casualty of my father's lies. I was the architect of the truth. And the truth had weight. "Mom," I said. And even I was surprised by the steadiness of my voice. The family's honor was destroyed 3 years ago. And not a single person in it stood up for the truth. There was a pause, just a breath, but I could feel her stiffen on the other end of the line. "Eliza, don't you dare take that tone with me." "I will not." I cut her off, the words like steel drawn from a sheath. Not this time. And then I ended the call. Not in anger, not even in sadness. Just release. I looked down at my hand. It was trembling, but not from fear. From fury so sharp it felt clean. And in that trembling hand, something else was rising, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. She was the storm's silence, the still air that let the mold grow. And now I saw it clearly. Let me ask you, has anyone ever hurt you more by standing quietly while someone else tore you down? Who was more dangerous in your story? The one who screamed, or the one who whispered nothing? That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My mother's voice still echoed in my head like a warning alarm on a loop, but I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry, and not the kind of anger that burns hot and fades. This was cold, focused, forged. That was the night I stopped being the scapegoat. I became the investigator, the soldier, the hunter. I sat in front of my secure laptop, the glow of the green terminal casting sharp shadows across my face. The desert outside was still, but my mind was not. I wasn't going to wait for justice. I was going to build it bite by bite, log by log. I didn't go through firewalls like a hacker in a movie. That would have set off every alarm from here to Langley. No, I slipped in quietly. I mimicked the credentials of a low-level system admin, one of the invisible techs no one ever questions. The base network was vast, bloated, with years of archived data. Most people don't realize that the real secrets don't sit in classified folders. They rot quietly in forgotten corners, mislabeled, half-deleted, buried under layers of bureaucratic dust. That's where I hunted. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. I just followed the scent, chasing timestamps, calibration backups, old auto-saved logs that should have been wiped, but weren't. And after hours of silent work, I found it. Buried deep in a subdirectory labeled something so generic it was practically invisible. Temper calibration, reports, Chang Q3 archive. Inside was a log plain, unencrypted routine on the surface, but the content made my blood run cold. My original 6-stage emergency warning protocol had been replaced with a 2-stage system. All or nothing. Fail or explode. No in-between. No time for intervention. Just a cliff. And there at the bottom of the log was the signature. Not a committee, not a team. A single override. General Marcus Thorne. His name. His clearance ID. His timestamp. Executed solo at 2:03 a.m., 24 hours before the Chimera explosion. I sat back slowly, chest rising and falling with sharp mechanical rhythm. This wasn't negligence. It wasn't poor judgment. This was surgical, intentional. A decision made in secret. And for the first time, I let myself say it out loud, just barely above a whisper. He did this. Not Caldwell. Not the engineers. My father. The man who raised me to believe in honor. The man who stood on stages preaching about duty. He didn't just throw me under the bus. He drove it. My hands moved on their own, saving the file, encrypting it, copying it to a drive I always kept close. And still I wasn't done, because a man like my father wouldn't make one mistake. He'd make a dozen, all buried under layers of performance and politics. So I kept digging. Let me ask you, have you ever found proof of a betrayal so calculated, so personal, that it made your entire past snap into a new shape? What did you do next? Did you look away? Or did you keep digging? I should have stopped. After finding that log with his digital signature, I should have shut the lid of my laptop, crawled into bed, and let the truth settle. But I couldn't. Something in me, something old and stubborn, kept whispering, "This goes deeper." So I dug. Not recklessly, strategically. My fingers flew over the keyboard like I was defusing a bomb, because in a way I was. Every file I found chipped away at the story they had built. And then I found the one that shattered everything. It wasn't hidden in some locked directory. It was just sitting there, lazily attached to an engineering packet buried under a stack of old system logs. A scanned image. It looked harmless at first, but the moment I opened it, I froze. It was my schematic. My original thrust vectoring valve placement, the design that had been blamed for the Chimera explosion. I knew it by heart. Every measurement, every curve of the lines, I had drawn it in pencil on my uncle's drafting table one quiet night 6 years ago. But something was off. Attached to the image was a scanned handwritten note. Official letterhead. Familiar pen strokes. And then I saw it. 4 words that made my stomach twist. Positioning altered per recommendation of Chief Engineer Caldwell. MT. I stared at it. At the initials. At the lie. That valve change was technically flawed. Any qualified engineer would have known it would destabilize the system. Caldwell would never have approved something that violated basic fluid dynamics. That note, it wasn't a record. It was a narrative. My father had created a paper trail to blame someone else for a change he had made. He had pre-written the alibi. The crime scene had been staged from the start. I covered my mouth a gasp, choking in my throat like it had been waiting years to escape. That was the moment the last wall inside me crumbled. It wasn't about misjudgment. It wasn't about overprotectiveness. It was about control, image, power. My father had rewritten history in his own handwriting and signed someone else's guilt. And then, just when I thought I couldn't feel any more hollow, I found the final nail. A scanned invitation. A cocktail party. Hosted by General Marcus Thorne. Dated the day after my resignation. A celebration for the successful restructuring of the Chimera project. He had toasted. Smiled. Shaken hands. While I sat alone, discarded with the ashes of my name in my lap. That was the night something inside me died, and something else was born in its place. Not rage, not grief, resolve, a steel-forged purpose. I copied everything to a secure flash drive. The logs, the schematic, the handwritten note, the invitation. It wasn't just data, it was ammunition. Let me ask you, what would you do if the person who raised you, the one whose hands once steadied yours, used those same hands to forge your downfall? Would you confront them? Or would you build something stronger from the ruins? I didn't sleep. Again. But this time I wasn't haunted. I was building. The sun rose over the jagged ridges of the Oregon Mountains, casting long, sharp shadows through the blinds of my office, but I barely noticed. My eyes were locked on the screen fingers, moving with the precision of a bomb tech. Every file I'd copied, the altered schematics, the override logs, the fake memo, the party invitation, I arranged them into a timeline so exact it could have been used as an autopsy report. Because that's what it was. The post-mortem of a machine and a reputation that had been murdered by ego and buried under military protocol. But I knew this alone wouldn't be enough. Files can be dismissed, spreadsheets can be debated. Digital truth can be called interpretation. I needed something else, something undeniable. So I grabbed a marker. Down the hallway I found an empty conference room with a full-length whiteboard, blank, gleaming untouched. I closed the door, clicked the cap off the black dry erase marker, and got to work. I didn't draw slowly. I didn't second-guess. The lines flowed straight from memory. The coolant loop schematic. The cascading 6-stage fail-safe system. The original fuel mixture logic. It was all still there, burned into my bones like blueprints written in scar tissue. I wasn't just recreating a design. I was resurrecting it. An hour passed. Then 2. The board filled with layer upon layer of technical logic equations, flowcharts, safety margins. At the bottom right corner, where most engineers might sign with initials or leave it blank, I wrote out my name in full. Eliza M. Katon. It was the most personal thing I'd written in years. I stood back, chest rising slowly. That whiteboard wasn't a presentation. It was a declaration. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclaiming the truth in front of everyone who had swallowed a lie. I didn't hear him come in, but I felt the change in the air, the thick, performative confidence of a man used to controlling every room he walked into. Julian Caldwell leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, wearing a grin so smug I could have wiped it off with a breath. "Still playing with your little drawings, Katon?" he said, loud enough to be heard by no one and everyone. "That's cute. Maybe you should go back to fixing tractors. This is the big leagues." I didn't turn. I didn't respond. I added one last arrow to the logic diagram. Then I underlined my name. Once. Hard. Deliberate. He laughed under his breath, then walked away. But I knew what would happen next. He would tell my father. The engineers would see the board. And the board would ask a question louder than I ever could. If this was the design that failed, why does it still hold together under scrutiny? Let me ask you, have you ever created something so honest, so rooted in who you are that no one could deny it, even if they tried? What did it feel like to finally let your truth take up space? Dr. Vance didn't knock. She didn't need to. When the door swung open, I turned, expecting another engineer ready to scoff. Instead, there she stood, poised, silent, her gaze scanning the whiteboard like a general reading a battlefield map. She didn't speak for a long moment, just took in every curve, every notation, every piece of logic sprawled across the board like a living argument. Her arms stayed crossed, her chin slightly raised. And then finally she said, "Who gave you access to this room?" I met her eyes steady. "No one," I replied. "I gave myself permission." She didn't flinch. "And this schematic?" she asked. "Every line of it mine," I said, drawn from memory. "It's the original Chimera design. Before it was altered." She walked closer, her heels barely making a sound on the tile floor. She stopped right in front of the board and pointed at the cascading failure logic, my 6-stage warning system. "This," she said, tapping it gently with the end of her pen, "is why I brought you back." She didn't praise it. She didn't compliment my mind or talent. She recognized it. And that was enough. She turned to me, then her eyes sharper than a scalpel. "We're scheduling a simulation review this afternoon," she said. "Public. Engineering team. Command observers. You'll present this version, and we'll run it live." My breath caught not in fear, but in the sudden jolt of something I hadn't felt in years. Legitimacy. "He won't allow it," I said without needing to clarify who he was. She nodded once slowly. "He doesn't have to." "I do. Power. Real power. Quiet. Unyielding. Wielded without performance." That meeting with Dr. Vance only lasted 10 minutes. She didn't ask for the flash drive, the logs, the paper trail. Not yet. She looked at the board, then at me and said, 3 p.m. Don't be late." And with that, she walked out. By noon, the simulation was on the official docket. And just like that, the storm began to gather. I saw it in the stiff backs of the engineers as they passed me in the hallway. I heard it in the tightened voices, the clipped whispers. My father couldn't stop it, not openly. But he was a strategist. He'd find a way to weaponize it. Turn the test into a trap. I knew him too well to think otherwise. But here's the thing about building your life around silence: it teaches you how to hear the things no one else listens for. And I wasn't walking into that room unarmed. I had truth. I had the board. I had the machine. And I was done waiting to be believed. So tell me, have you ever reached a moment where you stopped needing approval and started demanding to be heard? What happened when you finally stood up, not to explain yourself, but to prove it? The simulation room felt like a stage, and I was meant to be the sacrifice. Journalists lined the back wall, badges, dangling notepads ready. Cameras blinked like waiting judgment. The engineering team stood stiff at their stations, eyes everywhere but on me. And in the center, commanding the space with the ease of a man used to orchestrating destruction without leaving fingerprints, was my father. General Marcus Thorne. Beside him, perfectly polished, smirking with rehearsed ease, was Julian Caldwell. They had turned the scheduled review into a spectacle. Not to test the system, to test me, to humiliate. To end this once and for all under the cold gaze of the press. My father nodded to the technician. "Run the current configuration," he said, his voice booming with performance. On screen, the Chimera engine came to life, his modified version. It looked stable at first. Numbers flickered green, but I watched the telemetry carefully. It was predictable. At the 92-second mark, just like the original incident, the simulation triggered a failure cascade. Red warnings flashed, sirens blared, rotor imbalance, catastrophic event imminent. Caldwell slapped the stop button, feigning professionalism. He turned to the press with a grave nod. "As you can see, we're still working through the legacy issues in the original design." It was a lie so smooth it slid right off his tongue. And my father stood beside him, solemn, composed, playing the victim of flawed engineering. Then Dr. Vance's voice cut through the performance like a laser. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," she said, calm and clear. "Now we'll run Major Katon's original configuration." Silence. 1 heartbeat, 2. She had used my rank. Caldwell's jaw twitched as he plugged in my encrypted drive, whispering as he passed, "Let's see your ghost dance." The simulation started. My configuration loaded. But the system trained for the compromised logic bucked. The engine groaned. Red lights flared again. The journalists exchanged murmurs. Caldwell smiled too early. "Pause simulation," I said, stepping forward. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I approached the control console, recalibrated 3 core parameters manually: fuel variance, coolant rate, harmonic feedback. I didn't look at the data stream. I didn't need to. I could feel it. The discord, the imbalance. I adjusted by instinct, not guesswork. Resume. The alarms stuttered, then dimmed. One by one, the red lights turned amber, then green. The engine's tone changed, from strained to strong, from off-key to harmonic. We passed 92 seconds. Then 150, 210, 300, full cycle, no failure. Silence filled the room. No applause, just realization. The journalists turned their cameras away from the screen and toward my father. "So let me ask you, have you ever stood in front of the very people who wrote you off and let your work speak a truth they couldn't deny? What would you do when silence finally became your strongest voice? You could hear it. Not the hum of the engine that had faded. Not the typing or scribbles of reporters that had stopped. No, what you heard was the sound of a paradigm collapsing, of a myth cracking under its own weight." My father didn't move. He stood, frozen eyes fixed on the screen like it had personally betrayed him. Caldwell looked worse. His face had drained of color, his mouth slightly open like he couldn't quite process the math, because this time the numbers didn't lie for him. They told the truth. My truth. And the journalists. They weren't looking at the data anymore. Their cameras were turned toward the 2 men who had just been exposed not by scandal or testimony, but by engineering. Cold, clean, undeniable. The story they had built of the reckless daughter, the fallen engineer, the noble command rescuing a flawed design, that story died in real time. Not with a bang, but with the soft, steady hum of a perfectly calibrated engine simulation. Within 24 hours, the articles began hitting national defense publications. Pentagon consultant silences critics with flawless live test. Original Chimera design exonerated in public review. The tone wasn't gloating. It was surgical, just like the way they had tried to erase me. A formal inquiry was launched within days. Caldwell was fired almost immediately, gross incompetence and falsified internal documentation. But what he had really done wrong wasn't technical. It was political. He lost control of the narrative. My father was a different matter. Generals don't get fired. They get suspended pending review. He held press conferences. He stayed composed. But his eyes were hollow now. The silence that followed his words was no longer respect, it was doubt. And in Washington, doubt is fatal. You'd think I'd feel victorious, that I'd pop a bottle of champagne, laugh, scream, fall to my knees in vindicated joy. But I didn't. I felt hollow, not broken, just emptied. Like I had spent every ounce of energy climbing out of a grave someone else had dug for me, only to realize there was no celebration at the top, just air. And maybe peace. A few days later, my phone rang again. It was Leo. For one stupid, fleeting second, I thought he might say, "I'm sorry." I thought maybe he'd ask how I was, but he didn't. "What the hell did you do?" he snapped. "You destroyed him. You ruined Dad's legacy. You wrecked everything for what your ego." His voice cracked with rage. Panic, not grief, not guilt, just fear. For himself, his career, his precious network. I didn't say a word, not a single one. I let him shout. I let him run out of air. And when he finally did, I answered calmly. "You never once asked how I felt. Not 3 years ago. Not now. Goodbye." Then I hung up. Then I blocked his number. And just like that, the last thread tying me to that poisoned version of family was gone. Let me ask you what happens when you finally sever the rope that's been choking you for years. Does it feel like falling or flying? He came to me. Not in uniform. Not with rank. Just a man, aged and unarmored, pulling into my dusty garage in a civilian sedan that looked as exhausted as he did. I didn't look up right away. My hands were still deep inside the belly of a rusted-out Ford F-150 with a transmission that refused to cooperate. The desert heat clung to everything. Even the silence. When I finally stood wiping my hands on a rag, he was already standing beside the workbench. Shoulders, slightly hunched eyes, searching my face for something I no longer carried. Recognition, maybe. Respect. Maybe even fear. He didn't apologize. Of course not. Men like him don't lead with regret. They lead with justification. "I just wanted to protect you," he said, voice gravelly brittle. The design was too risky. I never thought it would go this far. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I held up my hands still streaked with oil, and he stopped talking like someone had cut power to his mouth. "Don't," I said softly but with finality. "Don't insult my intelligence." He blinked, stared, tried to find his footing. But I kept going. "You didn't do it to protect me. You did it to protect yourself. Your image. Your control. Your legacy." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That more than any speech was the moment I knew he believed me. He knew the truth had won. But he still wanted control over the ending. So I gave him one. I reached into the drawer behind me and pulled out the only piece of our shared history I hadn't burned. My West Point ring. The one he'd slipped onto my finger at graduation with pride that felt so real at the time it had fooled even me. I twisted it off slowly, the skin underneath pale, slightly indented. I stepped forward and placed it in his open palm. "I'm giving this back," I said, steady as steel. "I don't need your legacy. I'm building my own from the pieces you tried to break. And mine will be built on truth." I didn't wait for his reaction. I turned, walked into my garage, and pulled down the heavy roll-up door behind me. It clanged shut with the sound of closure. Final. Absolute. The kind of silence you don't fill with words. The kind you earn. For the first time in 37 years, I didn't feel small in front of him. I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like a daughter trying to be worthy of a father's pride. I just felt free. Let me ask you, have you ever looked someone in the eye, someone who tried to define your worth, and handed their expectations right back to them? What did it feel like to walk away, carrying nothing they gave you and everything you reclaimed for yourself? Freedom didn't roar. It didn't come with fireworks or applause. It came with silence. A silence so vast it almost felt like a vacuum. That's what no one tells you. When the storm finally ends, when the battle is over and your enemies are unmasked, you're left with yourself. Just you. And the quiet. The kind that doesn't echo with accusations anymore, but doesn't comfort either. It just waits. A year passed. Garage 17 still stood weather-beaten and stubborn, but something in me had softened. Not broken, just shifted. I wasn't at war anymore. Not with my father. Not with the institution. Not even with myself. I woke up without dread, without needing to scan my inbox for threats or whispers of sabotage. But that didn't mean peace came easy. After years of fighting, the hardest thing to do was live without armor. In the early days of that year, I wandered through the silence like a stranger. I'd catch myself reaching for old habits, bracing for impact that never came, decoding quiet moments as if they still held hidden weapons. But slowly, day by day, I started hearing something new beneath the stillness. Not threat, not doubt, but my own voice. Hesitant at first, then clearer. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. And that felt terrifying. And beautiful. I expanded the shop, bought the adjacent bay, knocked down the wall myself, kept the old sign Garage 17, but it wasn't just a garage anymore. It became something else, something bigger than vindication. I called it the Uncle David Project, named after the only man who saw my designs before the world did and never once asked for credit. It was a non-profit, tuition-free technical training center for female veterans, women like me, who had worn the uniform, lost something inside the system, and came out the other side looking for a place to put their hands to work again. Every morning, the space filled with clangs of tools, the scent of burnt metal and cheap coffee, and the laughter of women who had been broken in 1,000 different ways, but still showed up. Not because they wanted to start over, but because they could. I didn't teach from textbooks. I taught them how to listen, to feel the hum of an engine, to know when a bolt was torqued just right by the resistance in their fingertips. I taught them that their worth wasn't in the rank they left behind, but in the quiet magic of making broken things whole again. So let me ask you, what did you find on the other side of survival? When the war ended, not the one outside, but the one inside, how did you start to fill the silence? The envelope was thick, cream-colored, official. The Department of the Navy seal pressed into the corner like a brand. It came one afternoon, slipped under the shop door by a courier who didn't even wait for a signature. I knew what it was before I opened it. Recognition always comes late, doesn't it? Like a letter addressed to the wrong decade. Inside was a letter, handwritten, not typed. That alone stopped me. It was from Dr. Helena Vance. Her penmanship was precise, deliberate. No flourishes, no wasted ink. She wrote that the investigation had concluded, that the findings were irrefutable, that my rank, Major Eliza M. Katon, had been fully reinstated, with back pay, with full benefits, with formal apology enclosed. She also included something else. A contract. An offer to return. Not to White Sands. Not under anyone's command, but to lead a new independent R&D division operating under Pentagon oversight. She called it a place built for minds like yours. And then she added in the last line of the letter, the Navy needs people with the courage to speak truth to power. I sat with that letter for a long time. Didn't cry, didn't smile. I just breathed. Deeply. Slowly. Like someone who finally realized they didn't need air from someone else's tank anymore. Later that night, after the last student had left and the clatter of tools gave way to silence, I folded the letter and placed it gently in an old wooden box. Inside that box were my uncle's drafting pencils, a few creased schematics from our garage days, and the cloth patch from my first uniform. The things that reminded me who I was before anyone tried to rename me. Validation matters. Let no one tell you otherwise. But so does choosing your path after you've earned it. And I didn't need to wear a title to know I had already reclaimed everything they took from me. Piece by piece, bolt by bolt. In the shop, there's a dented steel cabinet that rattles when you close it. I keep the restored Chimera schematic taped to the inside of the door, not as a trophy, but as a compass. A reminder of where I broke, and where I refused to stay broken. I could have gone back, taken the office, the team, the clean labs and prestige. But I already had something more powerful. A space built by hand, by fire. For women who'd been told they were too damaged, too difficult, too dangerous to lead. And who showed up anyway? So tell me, have you ever received the validation you once begged for and realized you no longer needed it? What did you do when the world finally tried to give you back what you already reclaimed on your own? It wasn't a ceremony. There was no banner, no applause, no video montage of my journey from disgrace to redemption. Just a Tuesday afternoon and the smell of diesel in the air. One of my students, a young Marine Corps veteran named Roslyn, was standing over a busted transmission, her brow furrowed in frustration. Her shoulders slumped like the weight of the world had snuck back onto her spine. I knew that look. I'd worn it 1,000 times. I didn't say anything at first. Just watched her from across the bay, the way she kept trying to force the coupling into place. She was strong, fierce, but she was trying to conquer the machine by will alone. And machines don't respond to force. They respond to understanding. So I walked over, slowly reached into my uncle's old red toolbox, the one that still had burn marks on the side from a soldering iron gone wrong, and pulled out a wrench. It was small, worn, the wooden handle darkened by years of grease and calluses. It had belonged to Uncle David. He used to say it had more soul than any power tool in the shop. I didn't hand it to her right away. First, I crouched beside the transmission and gently tapped a bolt with the wrench's edge. It wasn't loud, but it echoed in the bay just enough to catch her attention. My uncle used to say I began quietly. A good engineer doesn't force a machine. They persuade it. They listen. She blinked at me, the heat of her frustration cooling just enough to let curiosity in. I held out the wrench. "Try this," I said. Not because it's better, but because it's patient. Feel it. Don't fight it. Let it tell you what it needs. She took the wrench slowly, as if it might break under the weight of meaning. Her fingers wrapped around the handle. She turned back to the engine, exhaled, and moved with a different rhythm this time. Less anger, more attention. And in that small, wordless moment, I saw the understanding click into place. Not just with the machine, but with herself. I stepped back, letting her finish. The clangs softened. The air calmed. And for a moment, it was like watching someone write their name for the first time in years and realize they still remembered how. That's what legacy is. Not a name on a plaque. Not a headline or a reinstated rank. Legacy is a small, quiet moment where someone else finds their strength because you handed them a tool and believed they'd know what to do with it. So let me ask you, who handed you the tool that changed your life? And more importantly, who are you handing it to now? I used to think healing would come like a thunderclap, loud, sudden, final. But the truth is, it came like this, me sitting on a dented metal stool at the edge of Garage 17, with a mug of stale coffee in my hand, watching the New Mexico sky melt into color. Burnt orange, dusty mauve, bruised purple. The kind of sky that doesn't ask for your attention but earns it anyway. There was no music playing, no work left on the bench, just silence. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a companion. A year ago, I would have filled this quiet with movement, cleaned a carburetor, tuned a generator, checked my inbox 3 times in an hour. But now I just sat, still. Not because there was nothing to fix, but because I didn't need fixing anymore. I remembered what it felt like those early days when every sound felt like judgment, when every silence felt like exile, when I thought worth had to be proven, defended, demanded. But now, worth just was. It existed in the way I handed a wrench to a student, in the way the garage lights flickered to life each morning, in the way my body remembered the motion of solving something without thinking, without flinching. The world outside hadn't changed much. Power still protects itself. People still rewrite stories that don't serve them. But me, I had changed. I had walked through fire, and instead of burning down, I built something from the ash. Not revenge, not reputation, resonance. There's something sacred about creating space for others after you've survived. It's not charity, it's not mentorship. It's a kind of echo, a quiet signal that says, I made it. You can too. And sometimes it's enough to just sit in that echo and let it speak for you. The wind kicked up a little dust. It curled around the open bay doors and tugged at the hem of my jeans. A year ago, that wind would have reminded me of loneliness. But now, it felt like a song. Not a sad one. Not triumphant either. Just mine. There's no blueprint for rebuilding a life after it's been taken apart, bolt by bolt. But I've learned that sometimes the silence that follows destruction isn't emptiness. It's invitation. So let me ask you, when everything finally quieted down in your life, what did you hear? And did that silence scare you, or did it show you something you'd forgotten how to listen for? The name came to me quietly, like everything meaningful in my life ever had. Not in a brainstorm or a strategy meeting. Just one night long after the tools had been put away, the lights flicked off and the students had gone home. I stood in the doorway of the expanded shop, now more school than garage, and watched the dark settle over the workbenches, the grease-stained floors, the engine parts laid out like skeletons waiting for resurrection. That's when I whispered it to the empty space. The Uncle David project. It felt right. Not just because he was the only one who believed in me when the world didn't, but because he never asked to be remembered. He didn't lecture. He didn't pose. He placed his hand gently over my designs and called me an engine whisperer. He saw what I was before even I did. And now that legacy was no longer just memory. It was motion. Each of these women, Roslyn, Maria, Lila Kim, they weren't just students. They were co-authors in a story that once tried to write us all out. They brought with them wounds that didn't show up in medical charts, dishonorable discharges for speaking up careers ended by silence bruises, left by arrogance in uniforms. And here in this dusty corner of New Mexico, they found something simple and radical: room. Room to make mistakes. Room to be angry. Room to rebuild, not for anyone else's forgiveness, but for their own forward momentum. I never needed a memorial. I didn't want a monument. But this place, this living, breathing engine of redemption, this was my monument. One afternoon, Roslyn came to me after finishing her first solo rebuild on a generator that 2 previous students had deemed hopeless. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the kind of exhilaration you can't manufacture. She didn't ask me if it was perfect. She didn't need to. She knew. The look on her face said everything. Pride without permission. Confidence without apology. I didn't touch the machine. I didn't correct a thing. I just said, good job. And I meant it more than any commendation I'd ever given or received in uniform. You see, Chimera wasn't my legacy. The project wasn't the point. The truth I proved in that simulation room was necessary, but not the destination. The destination was this women standing on their own strength, using their own hands, unafraid of silence or steel or shame. And if I had to walk through fire to build that, I'd do it all over again. So let me ask you, when your story is finally yours to name, what will you call it? And more importantly, who will you build it for? If there's one truth I've earned through every silence, every scar, every bolt turned with bare hands, it's this: no one has the right to define your worth but you. Whether you're a daughter dismissed by a father, a woman erased by a system, or a soul rebuilding in the quiet, your truth still matters. And if you're a parent watching this, ask yourself, have you ever silenced a child's brilliance to protect your own pride? Because sometimes the loudest damage comes not from what we say, but from what we choose not to see. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever lived through something like my story? Were you ever blamed, dismissed, or erased? How did you reclaim your voice? Share it with me in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, please like, subscribe, and pass it on, because someone out there needs to be reminded. They're not broken, they're just not done yet. Thank you for listening.